There we go. We are recording. And so Mr. Al, go ahead and make introductions.
All right, I will be happy to. Thanks, Susan. Welcome HASP members to this presentation on Detroit 67, which is going to be given by Rich Perez. Susan and Rich and I were talking briefly a few minutes ago about how two other conditions could have seriously diminished this talk today, one being a huge amount of snow falling and keeping us from getting into the HASP classroom, or even more pertinent, it could have been a snow day, which indeed it was, and then we wouldn't be meeting at all. So I am happy to say we can still be here and we can still have a presentation. A little bit about Rich, although a lot of you know him, and he probably doesn't need an introduction for many of us. Rich works nationally as an actor, director, and educator with an emphasis on new play development. I think that's one of the things that makes Rich kind of an exciting presenter, because he is introducing us to new things frequently. He's a former artistic director of the Bloomington Playwrights Project in Indiana, has been associate artistic director of Chicago Dramatists, and managing director of Hope Summer Repertory Theater. He has a multitude of directing credits. I'm not going to mention them all, but he has worked with the New York Fringe Festival. He's worked with Kennedy Center's New Visions, New Voices Festival. And he's done numerous shows, a few of which I've seen at Hope, including Roustabout. In addition, some of you may not know that he is an actor who has appeared on television. He's appeared in Boss with Kelsey Grammer. He's been on Chicago Fire, Chicago Med, Electric Dreams, and he proudly serves currently on the faculty of Hope's theater department here. So I'm going to turn it over to Rich.
Thank you.
Welcome, Rich.
Thank you so much, Al. Greetings, HASP friends. It's so good to be with you. Every time Al asks me to possibly present, my heart skips a beat, because I'm such blown away by all of you and your incredible contributions to our community. And so I always get a little nervous, but always excited as well. So obviously today I'm going to be engaging with you about our upcoming production of Detroit 67. I'll start with a bit of history about Detroit in 1967 and what has come to be known as the Detroit Rebellion. Hopefully this will give you some context for the world you will eventually see when you watch the production. Then I'll share some photos of the actual rebellion and a couple of videos. One is someone who was there on one of those fateful days in 1967. And the other, a short video with the playwright, Dominique Morrison, talking about her play. And then finally, I'll share a synopsis of the play and the playwright Morrison's bio. And then I'd like to open it up for us to have a conversation. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right, good. So here we go. This is a little bit of background about what happened that so the 1967 Detroit riots were among the most violent and destructive riots in US history. By the time the bloodshed, burning, and the looting ended after 5 days, 43 people were dead, 342 were injured, and nearly 1,400 buildings had been burned, and some 7,000 National Guard and US Army troops had been called into service. In the sweltering summer of 1967, Detroit's predominantly African-American neighborhood of Virginia Park was a simmering cauldron of racial tension. About 60,000 low-income residents were crammed into the neighborhood's 460 acres, living mostly in small subdivided apartments. The Detroit police, which had only about 50 African-American officers at the time, was viewed as a white occupying army. Accusations of racial profiling and police brutality were commonplace among Detroit's Black residents. The only other whites in Virginia Park commuted in from the suburbs to run businesses on 12th Street, which was a popular street in downtown. And then they would commute home to affluent enclaves outside of Detroit. The entire city was basically in a state of economic and social strife as the Motor City's famed automobile industry had shed jobs and moved out of the city center freeways, and suburban amenities beckoned middle-class residents away, which further gutted Detroit's vitality and left behind vacant storefronts, widespread unemployment, and impoverished despair. So this was also happening around the country. A similar scenario played out in metropolitan areas across America, where white flight reduced the tax base in formerly prosperous cities, causing urban blight, poverty, and racial discord. In mid-July 1967, the city of Newark, New Jersey, erupted in violence as Black residents battled police following the beating of a Black taxi driver, leaving 26 people dead. At night, 12th Street in Detroit was a hotspot of inner-city nightlife, both legal and illegal. At the center of the 12th Street in Claremont, William Scott operated a Blind Pig, that's an illegal after-hours club, on weekends out of the office of the United Community League for Civic Action. It was a civil rights group. The police vice squad often raided establishments like this on 12th Street. And at 3:35 a.m. on Sunday morning, July 23rd, they moved against Scott's Club. On that warm and humid night, the establishment was hosting a party for several veterans, including 2 servicemen recently returned from the Vietnam War. And the bar's patrons were reluctant to leave the air-conditioned club. Out in the street, a crowd began to gather as police waited for vehicles to take the 85 patrons away. An hour passed before the last person was taken away, and by then about 200 onlookers were lining the streets. A bottle crashed into the street. The remaining police ignored it, but then more bottles were thrown, including one through the window of a patrol car. The police fled as the small riot erupted. Within an hour, thousands of people had spilled out into the streets from nearby buildings. Looting began on 12th Street, and closed shops and businesses were ransacked. Around 6:30 a.m., the first fire broke out, and soon much of the street was ablaze. By mid-morning, every policeman and fireman in Detroit was called on duty. On 12th Street, officers fought to control the unruly mob, and firemen were attacked as they tried to battle the flames. Detroit Mayor Jerome P. Kavanaugh asked Michigan Governor George Romney to send in the state police, but these 300 additional officers could not keep the riot from spreading to a 100-block area around Virginia Park. The National Guard was called in shortly and didn't arrive until that evening. By the end of Sunday, more than 1,000 people were arrested, but the riot kept spreading and intensifying. 5 people had died by Saturday night. On Monday, the rioting continued and 16 people were killed, most by police or guardsmen. Snipers reportedly fired at firemen, and fire hoses were cut. Governor Romney asked President Johnson to send in U.S. troops. Nearly 2,000 Army paratroopers arrived on Tuesday and began patrolling the streets of Detroit in tanks and armored carriers. 10 more people died that day and 12 more on Wednesday. On Thursday, July 27th, order was finally restored. More than 7,000 people were arrested during the 4 days of rioting. A total of 43 people were killed. Some 1,700 stores were looted and nearly 1,400 buildings burned, causing roughly $50 million in property damage. Some 5,000 people were left homeless. So the so-called 12th Street riot was the 3rd worst riot in U.S. history, occurring during a period of fever pitch racial strife and numerous race riots across America. Only the New York draft riots of 1863 and the Los Angeles riots of 1992 caused more destruction. In the aftermath of the Newark and Detroit riots, President Johnson appointed a National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, often known as the Kerner Commission, after its chair, Governor Otto Kerner of Illinois. In February 1968, 7 months after the Detroit riots had ended, the commission released a 426-page report. The Kerner Commission identified more than 150 riots or major disorders between 1965 and 1968. In 1967 alone, 83 people were killed and 1,800 were injured, the majority of them African Americans, and property valued at more than $100 million was damaged, looted, or destroyed. Ominously, the report declared, quote, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Reaction to last summer's disorders has quickened the movement and deepened the division. Discrimination and segregation have long permeated much of American life. They now threaten the future of every American," end quote. However, the authors also found cause for hope. This, quote, "This deepening racial division is not inevitable. The movement apart can be reversed," end quote. Additionally, the report stated that, quote, "What the rioters appeared to be seeking was fuller participation in the social order and the material benefits enjoyed by the majority of American citizens. Rather than rejecting the American system, they were anxious to obtain a place for themselves in it," end quote. So there you go. There is a little bit of context for what happened that week, and certainly many of the things leading up, and also where we are today. So now I'd like to share some things with you on my screen. So I'm going to do that. These are just some photos. So let me open this up here. Share screen. And open this up a little more. So can everybody see that okay? Great. So in this July 23rd photo, you can see hundreds of people running down 12th Street on Detroit's west side, throwing stones and bottles at storefronts. The riot started after police raided an after-hour club, as I mentioned. So it was really the spark of that, those arrests, and the violence that happened that night was initiated after those arrests. It was just another example of what was the police and the riots and their reaction to it, and a lot of innocent people, obviously, there were certainly guilty people, but a lot of innocent people were also harmed in these riots. Here we see soldiers taking cover behind cars as they're trying to restore some semblance of order. Other examples of police and listening to recounts of what there would be a stall in the as it looks like there is here for a moment, and then suddenly it would just blow up again. It was as if there were continuing explosions being caused by other explosions of violence, which I'm referring to, but also literal explosions, as you can see here. Lots of blazes. This is an aerial view on July 24th. The National Guardsmen have been called at that point to try to stem the violence. Some more examples of what the streets look like, and so much of the violence that was taking place. And then finally, here's a couple color shots of the blazes that were ransacking that area of town. And as I mentioned, approximately 1,400 buildings were completely destroyed. So then I'd like to share a couple videos with you. If you'll give me one moment. So the first one is of, well, it'll explain it better than I can. There's a good introduction to this gentleman who was there during that time.
Did you know that you may qualify to get a new metal roof installed as part of a winter?
Richard, it's not showing up on the screen. Let's see.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
Yeah,
water. You may
go ahead and hit the share screen button.
even if you could afford to pay cash.
Yeah,
for
just
a
give me
new
1
roof.
sec. I'm sorry.
But don't wait.
No, that's okay. Just want to make sure I'm.
Monday night at
I did hit it, but maybe it didn't take.
Are you sharing from YouTube or a similar?
I am.
Okay, so yeah, so you're going to want to have that open, which you probably do. Click the green button in the middle of your
Yeah,
screen.
I did that. So
When you see that, go ahead and share sound, optimize for video. There you go.
is
Perfect.
it ready?
Yep.
Great.
8 Eastern on C-SPAN 2.
Washington
Perfect.
Journal continues. Would like to welcome the chair of the political science department at Howard University here in Washington, D.C., Clarence Lussane. He's also the author of the book, The Black History of the White House. And we invited you on this morning to talk about Detroit 50 years ago. You were there. You remember as a young boy. What happened?
I was there. My family we had been in Canada. Canada, of course, right next to Detroit. We had been fishing and we came back and the city was exploding. Just fire engines running all over the place. And on the second night of the uprising, what we call rebellion, my mother and my sister and I had walked to one of the major intersections, which is about 2 blocks from our house. And we had been there about 15 minutes when suddenly there were shots. And there was gunfire and everyone on the corner was shot except for me. My mother was shot, my sister was shot, they were injured. Fortunately, they were not life-threatening injuries, but they had to go to the hospital. I ran and got my father. He came back with the car, and then we took people to the hospital. But I was 13 years old, and that was, as you can imagine, very traumatic. But not just for me, for the entire city. It lived through that experience. And so, it's not been something that I've not thought about. Certainly had an effect on my life and the direction my life took.
We're looking at some of the film, and it was filmed from 1967 as the uprising continued for nearly a week. 43 people were killed, thousands were injured, and as many as 2,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed. So what sparked the uprising? Why did it happen?
Well, there was an immediate reason why it happened, which had to do with a response by the Black community to a police action. There had been a long history of the police simply riding into the Black community and harassing people. As a child, I grew up in fear of what we call the Big Four. These were police cars which had 4 police officers or 4 detectives who would drive around and they would simply harass people. It was racial profiling, plain and simple. But there's a bigger context that's important to look at. And that was the conditions under which African Americans, not only in Detroit, but in cities around the country, were facing as we move into the early and mid to late 1960s. You had political disenfranchisement where there were very few Black elected officials at any level, but at the municipal level, as well as the state level, as well as the federal level, you had economic marginalization where people had very little kind of opportunity. You had social isolation from schools to hospitals. There was essentially segregated, whether it was official segregation as in the South or de facto segregation, which existed in many of the cities. And then you had police brutality and harassment. A good friend of mine wrote a book called Police Power and Race Riots. And what she found, is she compared riots in the US with those around the world. What she found was that in almost every circumstance where you had these urban uprisings, whether it was in Paris, whether it was in London, whether it was in Los Angeles, whether it was in Detroit, almost universally they were started as a response to police actions. But that had built up over time where people said, we simply cannot take this anymore. Martin Luther King said that these riots, these rebellions were the language of the unheard. And what he was referring to was that all the channels by which people could have grievances addressed, social injustice addressed, simply did not exist. So people responded in the way that they had in front of them.
In our weekly podcast, The Sidebar, this week, our conversation with Joseph Califano. He served as...
All right. And then one more video. This is Dominique Morrison talking about her play. Let me stop the share for a second. I'm gonna have to do this the hard way. Can you still see my screen?
No.
Okay, good. I'm just gonna. One moment. I'm sorry this is taking so long. I had it all set up, but as we know, there's always something, right?
Five seconds feels like 5 minutes when you're trying to do it, but it's fine. We're a patient group.
Thank you all. I look forward to the time when we can be back together.
Detroiters are very protective over anyone that talks about our city as
Okay,
well.
we're still not seeing your screen.
Right,
Detroiters
I'm
are
just-
very protective.
Okay. I'm just warning you in
I
case.
appreciate it, yeah.
It's hard to know. It takes a while, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be about to share this. I'm going to, good there. Let's come up here and share screen. Good,
Perfect.
great.
Where it's coming up. There we go.
We're good.
Detroiters are very protective over anyone that talks about our city as well. They should be. I feel a great responsibility to represent my hometown well and to represent an era that I didn't even live in. So I have to make sure that the lens that I'm putting on the city is coming from a place of love and honor. So it really relies on the stories of my family and people that I've researched and talked to. Racial tension was really high in the city in 1967. At the same time, you know, there was Motown that was exploding, and people in the city were being integrated because of the music and because of the spirit and the attitude that the music expressed. And the Black Power generation was starting to emerge. So there was a lot of different elements that were coming together to create like this explosion in the city. The characters in the play sort of embody all of these different energies that I think was happening in the city at the time.
All right. So now I'd like to give you the synopsis of what Detroit 67 is all about, now that you have that context. The play tells a story of conflicting siblings against the backdrop of race riots that shook Detroit in 1967. Shell and Lank are brother and sister who share their recently inherited childhood home. They work together, scraping enough money to make ends meet. To supplement their small inheritance, they have converted their basement into a small private club, which was where the play takes place. Although the siblings are close, Lank is a dreamer, and he has secret plans for the money raised by their little nightclub. He and a friend want to buy a real bar together. Lank knows that his more conventional sister will probably object. She has a son at college who needs her financial support. So after Lank and his buddy, Sly, bring home a mysterious white woman on their way home one night, their situation becomes even more complicated. Detroit 67 is the second installment in her play cycle, the Detroit Project. The other two plays are Skeleton Crew and Paradise Blue. She's also the book writer for the Broadway musical Ain't Too Proud to Beg, The Life and Times of the Temptations, which was on Broadway before the pandemic shut it down, like so many other plays. So a little bit about the playwright herself, Dominique Morrison. She grew up in Detroit with her mother and father. Her mother's family is from Mississippi, and her father's family is from Haiti. Later, she attended the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where she received her BFA in acting in the year 2000. Her performance career began as a live poetry speaker, primarily performing for her hometown community in Harmony Park in Detroit. She began her career in the theater as an actor and received a BFA in acting from the University of Michigan. After college, she continued acting and worked with several organizations at the Lark Play Development Center, and she worked as an actor in a developmental production of The Mountaintop, which is an imaginary meeting of Martin Luther King and a housekeeper by Katori Hall. And she workshopped the role of Kamei there, which is the housekeeper. And then in 2013, the production went to Actors Theater Louisville, and she reprised that role. And she continues to act, but has stated that she would not act in any of her plays premieres. So let me open my view here. And finally, the most important thing, you all, I want to open up the conversation for questions and also give you some insights about why I chose this play and why we're putting on as a department and anything else you're interested in learning. Thank you so much for listening.
Rich, this is Al.
Hi, Al.
Would you also comment on the switch that you had to make because of the pandemic from Men in Boats to the Detroit Project?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. So Men in Boats was a pretty large cast, more than double of Detroit 67. And the nature of that play is that it was recounting the research of the Colorado River and when it was first discovered, and also the exploration of that. And so in many ways, the play lends itself to a lot of imagination in terms of how it should be staged. But that also meant people had to be very close together because they were in boats. So we decided that this isn't probably the best time to work on a play like that. And so there were some serendipitous things that happened at the same time. I've started this new program in the department called the Many Voices Project. For a while, I've felt like we are lacking in our ability to serve the BIPOC population in terms of students of color being able to participate in our plays. Some have and some do, but it's rare. And so, and it's that difficult thing of, well, we would do more plays that incorporated actors of color, but there are none. And I feel like that's a bit of a cop-out, honestly. It's like, well, then maybe we need to start creating opportunities, and if you build it, they will come, right? And so, at the very least, I wanted to start this reading series, which this was the first year we attempted it. It's It's called the Many Voices Project. There are 4 readings total. And this play, Detroit 67, was the second reading. And by reading, I mean actors standing at music stands with the script, reading it live, and then we would broadcast it. And sure enough, we found the actors to do it without any intent of actually putting it in the main stage season. But I thought, well, okay, so here we have an opportunity to actually do it. The actors are obviously interested. The play is phenomenal. So I took it to our faculty, and sure enough, they said, well, let's do it and put it in the main stage season. And we'll replace Men in Boats with this play. So obviously I was very excited about that. And here's the other piece of this that is, for me, kind of startling, in that in the history of the theater department at Hope, there has never been a person of color's, a playwright who's written a play on our stage. Never. Before I directed the Thanksgiving play last season. So here we got two in 1 year, which is phenomenal that we're making that shift. But that, and I don't get me wrong, I don't think it was any intentional thing. We have to keep in mind that where we are, right? That our student population is predominantly white. At the same time, I think it's hard to get students involved in theater when they're not seeing their stories told on our stages. And not just, and that just doesn't hold true for Hope. That's across America, right? I think, you know, people who run theaters often talk about, well, we don't have folks coming out, BIPOC folks coming out to see our plays. Well, a lot of the times the plays that you're producing don't speak to those communities. Why should they come out? And I think this is, and I'll go into more what our department is doing to try to remedy that, but I think this is one of the first steps. So that was a long-winded answer to your question.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
While other people may be thinking of questions, let me mention the fact that Rich is going to reprise his appearance at HASP talking about the Many Voices Project. Help me out, Rich. I think it's February 16, right?
Correct.
And so we'll hear a little bit more about that whole attempt to work with inclusivity and diversity on Hope's campus as Rich talks to us on the 16th. So that's one more thing to look forward to.
Thanks.
Rich, you have a couple of questions in chat. Sarah Briggs has asked, how has the pandemic affected your staging of Detroit 67?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we will perform it the same way we did the Thanksgiving play, which is each night will be broadcast live. But of course, we can't have a live audience. So, you know, a lot of folks, a lot of schools around the country are videotaping one performance and then just broadcasting it pre-recorded. And I've been very adamant that the students have to have as close to a normal run of the play, even though we're broadcasting. So it's been very important for me as a director to give them that opportunity of at least performing it 6 times or however many times we're going to perform it. I believe it's 8 times. So, but it's different, as you all know. I'm sure many of you have seen performances online. And we were talking about this in my acting class yesterday. There is something magical about that exchange between the audience and the actors on stage. That energy is, there's nothing that can replicate that. But the next best thing is to at least perform it live. So that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Francis Hackney has asked, what was the first reading for Many Voices?
It was called Fade. It was, is that your question? What was the play called?
I see her nodding.
Okay. It was called Fade. It was about a Chicago playwright friend of mine who's now working in Hollywood, and it was loosely based on one of her first experiences as a writer in a Latino writer in a predominantly male, white-dominated writing room on television, and just how she navigated that. It's a comedy. I mean, it's a dramatic piece, but it's very funny also in how she meets a Latino janitor who works in her office and in the building, and they become friends, and he starts telling her about his life, and slowly his life story becomes part of the weekly television show, and she does very, very well as a result of it, but at the same time it's not really hers to tell, right? So the complexity of that story.
Okay, Peggy's asked, and I was going to ask you this as well, when will the play be broadcast? I actually put those dates in the chat that you had verbally given me, and how can we access it, which I'm assuming that I've kind of promised everybody in the chat that I'd email them more information. So if we have a link or a website or something.
Sure. That should be up any day now, those dates and also the information on how to access it. The show opens February 26th and runs 2 weekends, and those dates are in the chat.
Okay, so I'll make a note to follow up with you to get, or if you know where it'll appear, I'll just keep checking back, and then when I find out what the link is, I will email everyone who's in this class to just make sure that they sign up and attend.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Yes.
I have one thing I wanted you to clarify. Can you remind everyone what BIPOC is?
Yeah, thank you. I shouldn't take it for granted. It's Black and Indigenous people of color.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had to Google it while you were talking, so I knew from context, but I think it's important because it's a great way to, you know.
Sure. Yeah, and I appreciate you reminding me to clarify that.
So we do have a few more minutes. Does anybody have a question if they want to unmute themselves and just ask verbally?
While we're on the subject of this show coming off as a virtual presentation, Rich, why don't you make a quick comment about the excellent radio program that you did of It's a Wonderful Life at Christmas? There may be people here that missed that.
Oh, okay. Sure. So as you may or may not know, Hope Summer Repertory Theater recently decided to do an online production of It's a Wonderful Life, but the radio show production of it. There's a show that's become very popular in that format, and it's done live, actually, not necessarily on online. And so Lenny, who many of you know, the artistic director, decided he asked me to direct it, and it was you know, in many ways these online productions become more like film, and which is a different beast in terms of editing and trying to make sure the story is best told without these floating heads, you know. So I think we pulled it off for the most part. It's always a different challenge, you know. Again, that fact that it's not live, that one was actually pre-recorded and shown several times. So.
And for those of you that missed it, there were 5 or 6 actors who took on probably a dozen or more parts, Rich?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it was remarkably true to the Jimmy Stewart film version of It's a Wonderful Life that we're all familiar with.
And did you have a question?
I just wanted to make a comment. I lived in Detroit in the years just before the riot. And I saw an employment ad and I called the agency and they sent me to this company and I got the job. And I went back to them because I had to pay a fee. And they said, oh, goodness, we sure took a chance on you. You could have been Black.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, that's such a, thank you for sharing that, Anne. And I think that is certainly indicative of what
Absolutely.
was going on during that time. Right? Yeah.
A couple more questions in the chat. Sarah's asking, could you talk about how the students prepared for the roles since 1967 probably seems like ancient history to them? Do you relate it to current events in race relations?
That's such a great question. And, you know, I'm going to be honest about the, I don't even want to say challenges, the opportunities that I have as a director, even though I'm a person of color. This is a predominantly African-American cast. And I never want to assume that just because we are people of color that I know exactly where they're coming from in terms of their own life experience and how they view the world, right? And so one of the things that's been swirling around in my head is how do I create an environment, one, where they feel comfortable to be their best selves and their most open selves, and in the rehearsal room, especially when, again, this is a foreign experience for these actors, at least at Hope. And most of them, and you know, some of them are haven't really had a lot of experience in general in terms of the theater. And so my first concern is how do I create an environment where they are comfortable and they feel like they are heard and open, and I'm open to whatever they bring to the table. I obviously want their input. As far as the second part of the question is, you know, all of this is research, any play you take on, right? And I was so proud of, yesterday was our first rehearsal, so, but one of the actresses came in and she said, one of the best times I had over the break was doing all this research about that time period, about, you know, and one of the actors actually is from that area. So started talking to her family about that time and what it was like. And so that's not only a gift to the actor, but also a gift to the production overall. So yes, we'll definitely be, you know, I'll be picking in their brain to see what it is they, like I do with any actor, what it is about their own experience that they can bring to these characters and make and bring them to life.
Thanks, Rich. There's 4 questions that have just appeared in chat. So the first is, will we have summer rep theater this year?
That's the hope. And you heard it here, and nothing is set in stone. So don't, please don't. The hope is to, yes. If we do, it'll be outside in a tent kind of situation, but nothing is set in stone because obviously it changes day to day. But we're all keeping our fingers crossed. It'll be, and if we do have it, it'll be a much more, it'll be a much smaller experience with a smaller cast, because of obviously the things that we have to be concerned with. So
okay,
we're doing our best to keep it back.
Some of this will become a little bit clearer in the spring, and then I'm hoping that we will have Lenny talk to us about it as well.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Jack Nineheis commented that he was on the faculty at Wayne State during that time, and he has a story that he'd like to share if he may.
Oh, please. Thank you, Jack.
Yes, there's so much I could talk about, but I'll give just a couple of quick examples of my experience. I was director of the honors program and chair of the Greek and Latin department, and one of our graduates from classics was Hubert Locke, African-American, who was at the time on leave from the university, and as assistant to the police commissioner, he wrote a book entitled The Detroit Riot of 1967. I have a copy of it right here.
Wow.
And talk about that later. But anyway, he and I had a number of conversations about his experience as a result of that. But we lived on the east side, and there was shooting within 4 blocks of our home. The National Guard troops rode up and down our street in jeeps with 4 soldiers in with their rifles at the ready. It was a rather scary time. We also were involved with a church at 12th and Pingree, 14th and Pingree, which is not too far from 12th and Claremont, where the riot broke out.
Right.
And within a few days after the end of the riot, I went to visit the pastor to find out how things were going. And he said, "What are you doing here? Just 15 minutes ago, there was a sniper on the roof of the building across the street."
Wow.
So he told me to get out of there. And so that was an interesting story too. But I was also involved with a group of people to establish a biracial group of Christians. We called it the Central City Conference of Evangelicals, and we met regularly, African American and Caucasian Christians, talking about ways in which we could bridge the gap that had caused the rebellion in the first place.
Yeah.
So there were many aspects of that year that are very meaningful, some painful, and some that I'm very grateful for having that experience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jack. That's powerful.
There's a few more, and thank you, Jack. Charlotte Lesky says, Palmer Park play and Stratford Theater highlighted schools were segregated. HASP class featured the play in early 2000. So
This, can you repeat that? It was.
I think it's a play called Palmer Park.
Oh, okay.
In Stratford Theater highlighted schools that were segregated, and HASP featured a class. So it's really a statement. Featured the play in early 2000.
Oh, I look that up. Thank you, Sean.
Francis Hackney asks, and I don't have an answer to this question. Somebody else on this call may, or class may. How many students of color does Hope have?
I'm not sure. Good question. I feel like I knew at one time.
And then either Eugene and Andre, I lived near the area during the riots, witnessing the tanks and National Guard. Subsequently, I went on to work for New Detroit, the nation's first urban coalition.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not seeing any more to that. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. You know, when I went to work for New Detroit, I did their communications, and up until they celebrated their 10th anniversary. And so I have some documents, some photographs, a number of things that might be useful in your performance.
Oh,
and I'd be glad to share those with you. Also, though, I have a concern, which is New Detroit, the whole purpose was to try to bring stability to the city again. They're still in operation, and Detroit is beginning to make a comeback. And I'm concerned that if people don't know the whole story, when they see the play, it's only going to perpetuate the reputation that Detroit has as a violent, difficult city. And it does have some of those things. And I just wondered, after the play is presented, is there an opportunity for people to be able to talk about what's come after that?
Absolutely. It's such a great question, and such an important part of what, I mean, we heard Dominique Morrison speak a bit. And one of the things that was so important to her is that these people are seen as multidimensional people, not, the working class, good people, good is, I hate that word, but people who weren't part of the looting and the big violence, that was the majority of folks during that time. And so, and yet we can't deny that there was something broken that incited those folks, some folks who wouldn't normally do something like that. They had enough. And so I think that'll be it'll be part of the dramaturgy, it'll be part of the talkbacks, it'll be part of the message that we're trying to get across, is that I think when you see the play, you'll see that these are really hardworking, good people who got caught up in the middle of this really horrible day, week in the history of Detroit.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll be back in touch with you to
Oh,
try
thank you.
to get, okay.
That'd be really helpful. Thanks.
Anne commented that there are a lot of people in West Michigan that have a great many stereotypes about Detroit.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you mentioned that also, Eugene, because I think the media tends to perpetuate those images more often than not. And, I had my own biases before I actually visited. I love Detroit. Detroit has become one of my favorite cities in Michigan. There's so much more to it. I mean, unfortunately, there's also, we still see the blight there, but it's such a great city. And as you say, it's on the rise. And that is personally part of the message that I want to get across.
I have some, I have some friends who lived in Detroit ever since they graduated from college in 1964.
Oh, wow.
And the woman pointed out to me that, with the automobile companies there, they purposely never devised a public transit system for Detroit. And the freeways had the effect of just decimating neighborhoods by driving right through the middle of them.
Yeah.
Which made that whole segregated problem even worse, I think.
Definitely. That's such a great point. Yeah. And that's talked about in the play too.
Oh.
Yeah.
I grew up in Detroit, and that week changed my life very greatly. We lived in a blue collar, I'd say lower middle class neighborhood. My dad was a very warm person, loved people. He was a social worker. He loved helping people. And virtually overnight, he turned very bitter. Out of fear for his children, I was privileged. I was a University of Michigan student at that time, and I was working for the summer downtown right on Woodward Avenue in a women's clothing store. And I had to ride the bus through some of the neighborhoods that were affected. And here was my dad looking at this and saying, what have we come to? And it really changed his whole outlook on life, which was very sad.
Yeah. I imagine he wasn't alone. There were probably lots of people. Thank you for sharing that. That's again very powerful. And actually, this is one of the things I hope, because obviously we're in Michigan. I was hoping that there would be stories from folks who had actually either lived there or had experiences with that time period. So thank you for sharing all this.
Yeah, Lauren wants to just share something here. Let's see if I can put the screen on again here.
Are we coming through?
You are, Sue. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, now you're off.
All right. My wife and I were living in Detroit. I was in medical school at the time in '67. Didn't have much money. We were on food stamps, and we had a basement apartment right across from Highland Park High School, about a block from Detroit Osteopathic. We were there was one other white person in the neighborhood, a lady that we would walk to church on Sunday morning with. But all the time, or the years before '67, we were there, we never experienced any hostility, any problem in the neighborhood. I really didn't feel threatened at all. Rode on the bus down Woodward to downtown and then transferred over to the school. And even after the riots, then we, just because of the safety factor, we did move to about 7 Mile and Woodward, but I never experienced any hostility or problems in the school or in the hospitals in the area after riots. So that, my experience is probably a little bit different than some of the others.
Yeah, but that's, again, that was the case, right? People who were from the neighborhood and knew each other, people lived side by side and it was fine. But there were other things going on in society that ultimately affected the greater community.
If I could say, my parents lived in Lafayette Park, which was in downtown, and I was living by 12th and the Boulevard. And after a couple of days of being in the area, I went down to stay with my parents, and there was a curfew on. And Lafayette Park, which was filled with the chief of police, Leonard Woodcock, various VIPs, it was an entirely different scene. They were having a sing-along at a bonfire in the middle of the park, and they were, wanting to help, but I couldn't believe the contrast between what was going on in this, right in the area of 12th Street. And then subsequently, because I was working in the Fisher building for an ad agency, and they had me go out and stay in Bloomfield Hills. And I went out to Bloomfield Hills and went sailing, and it was totally, totally different.
Wow.
The three different perspectives were really contrasting.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Rich, can you make a comment about whatever overall themes Ms. Morrison had in the Detroit project? I mean, between the three plays, is there a common theme that runs through them all?
Well, I think her ultimate goal is to, if you know the playwright August Wilson, wrote Fences and 10 phenomenal plays chronicling the African-American experience across the 20th century, one play for each decade. This is in a similar vein. She wants to do that for Detroit, and these are the first three plays. So the first one is about the blues in the 1940s, and then the other one takes place in right before the crash and everything that went down as far as the automobile industry and people working and that's called Skeleton Crew. So that's the theme, is the history of Detroit and the complexity of the stories that have come out of that region.
And does it sort of make the attempt to portray a perspective from the common people?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. At least so far, at least these three plays, the working class folks.
Sure. Other questions or comments, folks? I have been, just as another spectator here, I've been pleasantly surprised at how many people have tuned into the class today who actually had firsthand experiences with that time period in Detroit.
Yeah, I so appreciate your comments about that. Very inspiring in terms of, as many people have mentioned, the complexity of what Detroit, how complex Detroit is, as opposed to it being this one thing of that so many people have an image in their head. It is so much more than that.
I experienced a number of years ago the feeling that someone mentioned about how people from West Michigan have a particular view of Detroit. I felt terrible for my old city, which I still love, because we were on a bus trip to see a game at Tiger Stadium, and there were terrible storms and the Lodge Freeway flooded. And we had to turn the bus around on the freeway and then drive through some of the very worst burned out neighborhoods of Detroit to get to the stadium. And here was a whole busload of my Holland neighbors who didn't know Detroit. And this was what they expected to see. And it's what they saw, which was really sad to me.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. So hopefully, as a result of all this, we'll spread the word that Detroit is coming back, and it's going to be better than ever. You know.
Peg is asking if the play will be available by Zoom. How are you transmitting it? Is it going to be?
It'll usually. Let me remember the format. It's I always call it Venmo, but it's
Vimeo.
Vimeo, thank you.
Vimeo, yes. So it's going to be each night will be recorded individually, but Peg, as I'm hearing it, it's going to be a recording as opposed to logging in live. No.
You're going to log in live. It's
Okay.
Each night will be live.
Okay. I apologize. I should
No,
have made that assumption.
just so you know, it's also going to take place in the Nick, so we'll be filming it in the Nick, which is kind of cool. I've never directed in there before, so we're excited about that.
Will Vimeo then have a link, like, so say you go onto the site, is it a paid? I mean, will we pay for admission to watch it through a link?
No, I think you just have to make a reservation.
Okay.
I'm only going off of, because this is also new, what we
Sure.
did for Thanksgiving play.
Mhm.
There were two ways to do it. You could go online and do it, or you could call the box office and make a reservation. Hopefully we can still, you all can still do that. And then you'll be sent a link. And then you just, whenever the time that it's being performed, you just go on that link. And well, one of the things that we didn't really touch upon, I know we're at time, but is, just Detroit is Motown, and so much great music came out of Detroit and continues to, and that's a huge, the music of Motown has a huge impact on the play and what's happening throughout. So you'll get to hear some really phenomenal music as a result of what she's written.
Rich, what did you say was the playwright's connection to the Temptations play on Broadway?
She wrote the book for the musical, Ain't Too Proud, the Temptation story. And so it's a jukebox musical, which means is they've created a loose story around all the great music that they wrote and performed. And so the characters from the Temptations are recreated. And so it was on Broadway. It had been on Broadway for about a year before the pandemic hit.
There was a clip or two from that show on a Broadway Cares night on TV not too long ago.
It did very well. I mean, it was a huge hit. So as you can imagine, that music is so much fun.
And she wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I love seeing all these cats, including yours.
Anne's cat gets very active every time she speaks. Is that correct, Anne? You're muted.
Yes. She actually, for the whole broadcast, she sits behind my laptop. And then if I speak, then she comes out and has to be part of it.
Your cat is making an appearance as well, right behind you. Very good.
Oh, mine. Oh, it's, Mimi, he called you a cat.
Oh,
yeah. That's my long-haired Chihuahua. And she's very anxious right now about something. I don't know. She doesn't normally join us, but meet Mimi.
Hey, Mimi.
And that's okay. She kind of does look like a cat. She doesn't look like a Chihuahua. But you just for the future, you actually do have 90 minutes for your sessions. So we're a little bit under, but I feel like everybody's had an opportunity to ask questions. Does anybody else have any last minute questions or comments before we thank Rich for just an amazing discussion?
I'm happy to stay as long as I need. You know, I thought it was till 2:30, so
I have one more comment on the actual staging that you're going to do of Detroit 67. Do you have other faculty people still involved with the show in terms of sets and lighting and all that kind of thing? Can you throw out a credit or two for some other people?
Sure. One of our new faculty, Eric Van Tassel, will be doing lights, and Stephen, who is our shop manager, our technical manager, will be doing the set. We do not have a set designer right now because Richard Smith is retired. So in the interim, he's stepping in, and he created a beautiful design for it. So I'm really excited about that.
I got tied up with my snow shoveling and things, and so I came in late. Will I be able to get some information so I can view the shows and that? Because I didn't come in till after most of it happened.
I think so, right?
Yeah, Suzanne, I will make sure that everybody that's attending this class will get all the information.
Thank you.
Yeah, about logging in or getting to the site to make a reservation, it sounds like.
Also, Suzanne, and I don't see it right now, but Susan put some of the information on the play in the chat. So if you check on the chat, it might still be there.
Thank you.
I'm gonna resend it so it's at the top. So, well, everyone, go build a snowman.
Let me say thanks to Rich. Rich, I think we all know it's been a difficult year for Hope College Theater. And actually for every other theater there is anywhere.
Absolutely.
I mean, in terms of theaters going dark because of the pandemic and people being unemployed in lots of places and a lot of people in the industry not being able to make ends meet. I know you guys, Dinah and you both managed to get a fall show together under extraordinarily difficult circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you that didn't see the Thanksgiving play, it was a lot of fun. It tried to approach Thanksgiving with a group of Caucasian actors trying to obtain a indigenous Native American perspective on Thanksgiving and having a difficult time doing it. It was pretty funny. And Dinah managed to she did 12th Night, didn't she, Rich?
Mm-hmm.
And had to do that in the fall outside, right?
Yeah, that was a cold night for me, definitely sitting up.
So a lot of difficulties, but you guys have been very intrepid in managing to make the seasons happen anyway. And we want to just say all of the encouragement we can give and the patronage that we can offer in attending for the shows that you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You know, it's, as you say, we're not alone. It's tragic in that many theater companies are shutting down and are no longer able to be in existence. But at the same time, there's so much hope in that people have found new ways to bring work to online and other formats. So if theater is nothing else, it knows how to survive. So people have been saying for the last 200 years that theater's dead, and I say, well, I think this is a good example that it's not.
It will be back.
It will be back.
Just as a reference to yesterday's history of pop music, one of our presenters hooks for next week, Monday, is that he's going to be featuring as part of pop music a lot from the musical Hamilton. So it's just one more witness to the fact that we all love theater. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Richard, for presenting. We enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Is there any business, Rich, that we need to wrap up? Or are we all set?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, thank you so much.
You take care.
I look forward to seeing this production. I'm very excited right now.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Al, for your great coordination, and we'll see everybody soon.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Al.
Thank you. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Susan.
Bye-bye.